Hey everyone, welcome back to another Web Dev Junkie video. So one thing that is really important to understand as you're learning how to code is to figure out how to take larger problems and kind of split them up into sub-problems. It turns out whenever you're doing any type of programming or engineering, most of these larger problems, whether it be like building out a social media website or building out some type of machine learning algorithm to kind of parse cat images or whatever, those are always broken down into smaller problems, and if you solve all those problems individually, you can usually end up combining those together to solve a higher problem, and then that higher problem can be combined with other, solutions that you found to find a solution to the larger goal problem, right? So that's what I want to try to ramble on about today. But before I do, be sure to click that like button because it helps my channel grow. Also, be sure to click the subscribe and bell icon if you want to see videos like this in the future that should hopefully help you become a better web developer. So let's just start with a really simple example. Like let's say your task or your problem you're trying to solve is how do I build a landing page for a client? Okay, so if you just take that problem as a whole, you need to first figure out how do I actually structure a page and have it contain a header and maybe a section that has like an image and a title. So in this example, that's the overarching goal. And if you look at that goal, you might be overwhelmed because you don't know how to do any of that stuff, right? You might be a brand new beginner and you don't know how to actually take a problem like that and implement it in code. But I mean, what I recommend doing is find ways to look at that overarching problem and divide it into smaller subproblems that you can focus in on and just solve for that particular moment, right? So for an example, a landing page. What are some subproblems that might exist on a landing page? Well, you need a header, and that header usually has like a logo and a title of your website. And then on the right, you typically have like some links, some navigation. Maybe you have a drop down. Maybe you have a circle that shows a person's head. And when you click on it, it shows a drop down with more options that you can kind of go to your account or click a logout button. All right, so we took the larger problem of a landing page and we broke it into a smaller problem of how do I build a header? And then you can take that header problem and kind of divide it into smaller problems as well. So how do I actually take a DOM element and push contents to both sides of them, right? That's a small subproblem that you need to figure out because typically most headers have logos on the left and they have links on the right? So you need to kind of figure out the subproblem of how do I pad or how do I space content inside a div? And once you've figured out the actual subproblem you're trying to solve, it becomes much easier to find a solution because typically if you go to Google and say, how do I build a header? The results you get back can vary. But instead, if you were to type, how do I space elements in a div apart? Maybe you'll get references to like, Flexbox. Maybe they'll tell you how you can justify content, how you can align items, and all of these smaller, tools that you can use help you solve that subproblem. So once you figure out how to space the content, you need to then figure out, okay, how do I add an image in the header? So then at that point, you can go into Google, how do I add an image to HTML? And they might show you an image tag. They might explain what the source attribute is. They might explain what an alt attribute is. They might give you some more information that'll help you solve that subproblem. So if you figure out how to do the image and how to space some content, you then need to figure out, well, how do I add links to a header? That sounds kind of complicated. So you go to Google, how do I add links to a HTML document? And if you're lucky, you might get some Stack Overflows that point you to the A tag, where you can kind of use an href attribute on the A tag to point some text to another link so that when the user clicks on the link navigation, they will change pages, okay? That'll basically redirect their browser to another page. And then the last part of the header is how do I make it so when I click on a profile picture image, a drop-down navigation occurs? Well, then you have to get into the domain of JavaScript and dynamic websites. So the problem you're trying to solve in that case is how do I listen to when a user clicks on an element, okay? You type that in Google. How do I listen in JavaScript when a user clicks on an element? You might be pointed to references that say use the onClick attribute on DOM elements, and you could point that to a function. And then you're like, well, I don't know how to use a function in JavaScript. So you can Google, how do I write a function in JavaScript? Kind of learn about that. So at that point, you can kind of figure out how do I do that onClick attribute and make it invoke my function. And then inside that function, you have another subproblem that you need to figure out. How do I dynamically show a div when that click function is called? That's another problem that you can kind of break into different steps, right? So I don't know, I'm going to keep going along this logic and hopefully it helps you understand like where I'm getting at, but let's just try to finish up this topic. I know I'm kind of just rambling on, but looking at that problem of like you have a function and when a user invokes that function, you need to show some type of drop down DOM element, right? So how do you do that? Well, first of all, you need to figure out how do I select DOM elements from the page, because you're going to have to find a hidden div and probably make it be displayed, right? So when that click function invokes, you need to find the div on the page, change the styling so it's no longer hidden. Maybe you can do like, div.style.display of block instead of hidden. And then that div should show up on the page. But then you might run into another problem with like, okay, well, how do I make it so that drop down actually shows up in the right position? Because right now it's showing up at the top left of my page and I can't get it to go where I want it to go. So then you'll go and look up, how do I position elements on HTML? And then you might be redirected to CSS. They might show you how you can do position of relative, position of absolute, position of fixed potentially, and you can do left and top attributes to kind of move that element to be exactly where you need it to be when the user clicks on the dropdown, right? So after you kind of take that overarching problem of how do I build a landing page, and you broke it down into how do I build a header, and then you broke that down to how do I space contents on the header, and then you broke that down further into how do I make a button that'll drop down some navigation when a user clicks on a profile picture. Once you've kind of distilled the larger problem into the smaller problems, it makes it a lot easier to kind of just focus in, figure out what exactly you need to solve, implement the logic, and then use the solution to figure out the solution for your larger goal, which is building that landing page. And that was a lot. I know I kind of talked for a while about the whole flow, but my point is that every problem that you solve can be broken down into smaller problems, right? And the better you get at understanding how to break down larger tasks into smaller subtasks, and those smaller subtasks can probably be broken down even further into micro tasks, you're going to become a much better software engineer and problem solver, because now you're not focusing on this huge problem that seems so ambitious and so ridiculous to solve by yourself. Instead, you're focusing on a simple little subtask that might say like, how do I space elements on a div? Simple as that, right? You could spend a day trying to figure that out, and then you move on to another subproblem and just continue that process. So with all that being said, like, how do you actually get better at breaking down larger problems? Honestly, it just takes practice, but some things you can use along the way is maybe using like a to-do list app or like a checkbox app where you can kind of list out these tasks in order that you think need to be kind of created. Remember, solving a higher problem requires you to solve subproblems, so maybe start with the lower, easier tasks first, and when you have a good, solid foundation of how you solve those, you move up to the larger problems above. Another thing that's really helpful as well is to kind of mind map potential solutions to your problem, right? So if you need to solve a simple subproblem, you can use mind mapping software or just pencil and paper. You draw a circle around the main problem you're trying to solve, or the subproblem you're trying to solve, and draw little lines and more boxes around like, what are potential things you can Google? What are potential things that you can try? What are things that you haven't tried? What are things that you have tried but have failed? And just kind of keep a mental map of like, where you've been and where you're going with solving this problem. So what I would say is if you follow this process, you can actually take this kind of formula and apply it to whatever you want to learn, right? If you want to learn how to become a back-end web engineer and build out REST APIs, you could do this same process, right? You could say, how do I build a web server is your top problem, but then you need to kind of distill it to like, how do I accept requests in Node.js? How do I send back responses in Node.js? That might give you references to an Express library you can use and kind of explain like what you can use Express for. And then you can distill those problems into like, how do I make different routes on my REST API? And then you can kind of maybe Google that, get more solutions and kind of implement those. And after doing that for a couple of days, you're actually going to be successful building out these larger scale applications because you've broken everything down into subproblems and figuring out the big solution, figuring out the big application you're trying to build is much, much easier. Honestly, I just wanted to do a stream of conscious video for you all and just get some content out there for you all. I didn't really have a good plan for this video, so I'm kind of feeling like I'm all over the place. But if you did enjoy watching this video, be sure to give me a thumbs up because it helps my channel grow. Also, be sure to subscribe and press the bell icon if you want to get more videos like this in the future that should hopefully help you become a better web developer. And like always, leave a comment below if there's a special way that you like to break down larger problems into smaller subproblems and kind of figure out solutions for those problems. Have a good day and happy coding.